Okay, let's dive into this. Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're looking at a really fascinating piece of theological academics. Our goal is to systematically unpack a highly structured taxonomy of sin, exactly as it's presented by Dr. Robert A. Peterson. Whether you're a serious theology student or honestly just someone interested in how ancient texts categorize human behavior, this framework offers a really compelling, structured look at a super complex topic. So, our source material for this analysis is Dr. Peterson's Session 13 lecture document, which is titled Humanity and Sin. And just to be totally clear right off the bat, we're looking at this strictly as a descriptive framework. We are just neutrally mapping out how this specific lecture defines and categorizes sin from a biblical perspective, using the exact texts and historical logic that Dr. Peterson employs to make his points. Let's move to and see how this builds. We'll be utilizing a zoom-in structure today, looking at 4 specific categories: offending God's character, guilt and pollution, thoughts, words, and actions, and lastly, the deceitfulness of sin. All right, starting at the very highest cosmic level, we have Section 1, offending God's character, or the supreme violation. Dr. Peterson's absolutely crucial first point here is that all sin, regardless of who or what the immediate victim is ultimately framed as a direct offense against the supreme character of God himself. To really illustrate this, the lecture points to King David in Psalm 51. Now, David had committed some severe earthly crimes, right? Adultery with Bathsheba, the literal murder of her husband Uriah. And yet, in his confession, David says, "Against you, you only have I sinned." The framework highlights this to show that even the most horrific horizontal crimes against other humans were viewed biblically as ultimate, vertical sins against the Creator. The lecture then contrasts David's massive failure with the absolute resolve of Joseph in Genesis 39. So when pressured by Potiphar's wife, Joseph is far from home, he's totally isolated, yet he resists. Why? Well, because of his God-centered focus. He literally asks, how can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? Dr. Peterson enthusiastically highlights this as a prime biblical example of a human valuing God's character high above intense personal temptation. Which brings us to how the lecture actually defines the 10 Commandments. In this specific theological framework, these aren't viewed merely as some obsolete civil code for ancient Israel. Instead, they're seen as everlasting revelations of God's holy, just, and loving character. Therefore, breaking these commandments isn't just a matter of, breaking a rule. It is fundamentally dishonoring the very character of the lawgiver. Okay, let's transition down to the systemic level with our second pillar, Section 2, Guilt and Pollution, exploring the dual impact on humanity. Now, what's really interesting about this is how perfectly these two concepts are separated. First, we have guilt. This is the legal dimension. It's a status that makes humanity answerable and condemned before a holy God. And then we have pollution. This is the moral dimension. It's the internal infection that corrupts human minds, bodies, and daily lives. It's essentially the difference between a legal standing in a courtroom and, actually scratch that, it's more like a systemic virus running through the body. Let's briefly walk through the mechanics of the guilt aspect, relying on Dr. Peterson's analysis of Galatians 3. The logic works kind of like a timeline. Point 1. Humanity is under the curse or penalty of the law. Point 2, Christ steps in as a legal substitute, becoming a curse by hanging on a tree to absorb that penalty. And point 3, because that legal penalty is paid, believers receive the blessing promised to Abraham. It's a classic mechanism of penal substitution. Shifting over to the pollution aspect, the source contrasts the deeply corrupting deeds of the flesh against their antidote, the fruit of the Spirit. The lecture categorizes this pollution into sexual sins, religious sins like idolatry, and, very heavily, interpersonal sins like enmity and strife. And these are directly countered by spiritual fruits like love, patience, and faithfulness. Now, I get to nerd out slightly here because the text reveals a really fascinating structure in Galatians 5. It identifies a 4-point chiasm, which is an inverted poetic structure. The outer layer is the law of love. The next layer in highlights interpersonal sins, specifically warning against biting and devouring each other. The third layer is the command to walk by the Spirit. And right at the very center, emphasized by the entire structure, is this epic clash between the deeds of the flesh and the fruit of the Spirit. From systemic corruption, we zoom in even further to Section 3, thoughts, words, and actions, the practical manifestations. This part of the framework explains exactly how that internal pollution practically manifests in everyday life. The lecture emphasizes that sin isn't just a physical action you can catch on a security camera, right? Referencing Jesus' teachings in Matthew 5, the framework notes how Jesus equated the internal thought of hatred to the physical act of murder, and internal lust to adultery. This penetrates the heart and addresses the spirit of the law, not just the letter. And this brilliantly illustrates the intense focus the lecture places on the sins of the tongue, drawing heavily from the book of James. The core idea here is that words are actions, and the tongue is the ultimate indicator of that internal pollution we were just talking about. James uses these incredibly vivid biblical metaphors which the lecture energetically narrates. Just think about it. A tiny metal bit controls a massive, powerful horse. A remarkably small rudder directs a giant ship through the ocean. And a single microscopic spark is capable of burning down an entire ancient forest. It perfectly demonstrates how a disproportionately small body part, the tongue, is capable of immense good or absolutely devastating evil. So if sin corrupts us systematically and manifests in our daily thoughts and our destructive words, well, it begs a massive question. How is it that humans can be entirely blind to their own destructive actions? Why don't we see the damage we're doing? That question pivots us perfectly into the fourth and final dimension, the deceitfulness of sin, or the psychological interior. This dimension revolves around the concept that sin inherently hides itself from the sinner. To illustrate this spiritual blindness, the lecture pulls a humorously absurd image from Matthew 7. It's the metaphor of a person trying to perform delicate surgery to remove a tiny speck of dust from someone else's eye while completely ignoring the massive wooden beam, or as Dr. Peterson calls it, the telephone pole, sticking out of their own eye. It's a spot-on picture of human self-deceit. The framework summarizes the nature of this deceitfulness with a few key characteristics. It involves secret sins that are totally unknown even to the person committing them. It highlights our innate human tendency to immediately react defensively when we are sinned against, while totally ignoring our own faults. Ultimately, relying on Jeremiah 17, it points to a deep, ingrained wickedness and deceitfulness at the very core of the human heart. It is a profound, deeply rooted psychological blind spot. So the crucial point is how this all connects. Think of Dr. Peterson's structure like a giant funnel. It starts at the widest possible point, a cosmic offense against the supreme character of God. It narrows down into a systemic dual problem of legal guilt and moral pollution. It narrows further into the practical daily manifestations of our thoughts and words. And finally, at the very bottom, it hides itself from us behind a thick layer of psychological self-deceit. Which leaves us with this provocative thought to close out our explainer today. Based purely on the logic of the framework we just explored. If sin is genuinely this deeply systemic, and if its very nature is to conceal itself from the person committing it, how do any of us even begin to accurately recognize our own blind spots? It's a fascinating, challenging question to walk away with. Thank you so much for joining me for this breakdown.